Gabriela Fontanesi is up next. She is going to be here chatting with us about allyship and advocacy for vineyard stewards. We're going to focus on the intersection of wine and activism. You know, we just heard from three amazing panelists who have seen the difficulties and the challenges. Gabriela herself is a passionate ally and driver of activism in the wine industry. She's also a recent graduate of UC Davis with harvest experience at Contessa and a year-long viticultural and enology internship at Mathiasen, who has had firsthand at being in the vineyards, seeing these challenges and also finding ways that we can improve solutions. Hi, Gabriela, how's it going?
Hi, it's going good. How are you?
So good. You're my tocaya. That's what we say in Spanish when we have the same name. I love that. I'm so glad that you're here. You know, it was amazing when I first met you. We had like this mutual passion for activism in our communities. And you started to share with me, you know, about how you found a way to bring a lot of that activism and your passion into the industry with what you'd seen over the years working in the vineyards. I would love for you to talk to me about, you know, what allyship in the industry specifically looks like. What are the conversations we should be having with each other right now in the wine industry as we look to really shape the future that we want to have in this industry and where we want it to go?
Yeah, I think kind of the first place that I started, and I think is an entry point for anyone potentially, is looking really at the narrative. Obviously, it can be really challenging and a little bit overwhelming to try to come up with, let's say, solutions to problems that are so large and often, you know, much larger even than the wine industry itself. And the place that I felt most comfortable starting was basically looking at the narrative representation of those issues, and often really the lack of representation. And you know, that's what really inspired me to write the Stewards of the Narrative piece. You know, I've always been trying to figure out why I think activism in wine is so important to me. And for me, it's the fact that unlike many agricultural industries, the wine industry has this huge narrative space. We have so many connections to our consumers. And I think we talk a lot and passionately about land stewardship in wine. And I think you can summarize that through the importance of terroir in wine narrative. And my kind of question, or the realization I had through the experiences I've had in industry, was basically, what about the responsibility as narrative stewards? And who are we representing and what are we representing? Because the truth is, I think for many of us, let's say even as consumers, it's not easy to make purchasing decisions that align with maybe our moral or ethical values. And so making sure that we're really being conscious about what we're talking about and that it's aligned with our values. And obviously, I think anyone who's showing up here to this summit is probably already well along that way. But, you know, I think that's one of the places that I feel like there's a lot of possibility for. No matter who you are, you can engage with that, you know, engage even with what is the narrative that I'm either being given or what is the narrative that I'm able to spread and share.
100%. And that entire narrative that you wrote, Stewards of the Narrative, was super impactful. I know that a lot of people in the industry related to what you said and how important it is to continue discussing those narratives and showcasing these stories. I thought it was super interesting too. As I was reading it, you happened to mention a study that you actually read, and I'm going to paraphrase here. You mentioned something about how 16% of the world's farms would be rendered unusable, and a third of the world's farms will have failed because of a lot of the modern farming techniques that we've adopted, how this would lead to food insecurity, famine, crop failure. Can you share any kind of insight on you also expanding on that in terms of how it relates to vineyard workers' pay and the knowledge and skill that they contribute to farming, and how the world needs to begin to respect those contributions as well, as we also think about, you know, the world and farming and harvesting in general?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to start, first of all, by really addressing that for me, this quote wasn't a quote meant to create, let's say, climate alarm. And obviously, there's so many studies out there. But what I really loved about this study was that those statistics saying that 16% of, you know, the sites that was included in this study that were farmed conventionally were potentially on track with soil failure, which ultimately is crop failure, within 100 years, and then a third of them within 200 years. But that statistic was also very quickly paired or paralleled with a statistic that said, I think it was more than half of the sites that were farmed with some form of convention, conservation in mind, had a life expectancy, I believe, exceeding 10,000 years, if I'm remembering correctly. You'll have to read the article to get it. But I think the importance of that quote or that study to me was showing that this is a decision. We're not stuck in one lane. And with that decision, in terms of which direction are we going to go in? Are we going to continue on the path that we have been going down, that studies like this are showing are, potentially dangerous to all of us, everyone, regardless of who you are and where you are in the world. Food is important to everyone. And if we are going to decide not to follow that path, for me, the place that it intersects is the fact that the people who have the knowledge to make these changes are the people who understand the land. And that is the vineyard stewards, the people, the land stewards. And I think a lot of us in the wine industry have, and this again goes back to narrative, I think land stewardship has been represented through ownership or branding. And I don't think it often gets the vineyard steward respect. And that's why I'm so grateful for this word, vineyard stewards, that really connects with the narrative steward, which connects with the land stewardship.
Absolutely. And I loved when you used that word. And I had also heard Sam Para previously use that word through his Aivoy program whenever they talk about vineyard workers, because that's what you're doing at the end of the day, right? You're a steward of that land, really taking care of it, making sure that we can have a sustainable and equitable food labor practice system where we're continuously getting, the grapes that we need to continue harvesting wine, where we're continuously getting the fruits and vegetables that we need to nourish ourselves. So let's make sure that we're also taking care of those individuals who are taking care of us, whether it comes to, fair wages, whether it comes to making sure that there's hazard pay involved, right? We just got out of a pandemic. We experienced these crazy, insane wildfire seasons. Certainly here in California, I know Oregon just experienced something, wild and out of the norm. You mentioned something as simple as like, hey, wineries, when you're looking at your landscape, look at your break rooms, right? Why is there such a separation between the break room and, this place where everybody's going to gather together? But it's always separated between the tasting room and office staff and then people who work the vineyards. And it's like, why not make that more cohesive so everybody understands everybody who is essentially involved at the end of the day?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think our industry, in alignment with the changes that we want to see, probably has to go through a questioning of how our spaces have been designed. Because I know this last year, working in the vineyards, I was often, surrounded by $1 million properties with some of the most gorgeous homes I've ever seen that no one lives in, or at least no one lives in the majority of the year. And yet, I was working with at least 6-7 other people and often saw other, house cleaners, gardeners, construction workers. And, something as simple as the fact that none of us had any facilities to use the restroom. We were all dependent on portable bathrooms, on porta potties, which, is simple. But when it's 110 degrees out, that is a really nasty smelling sauna. And, just really having that stark moment of realizing how much this space was built for someone who isn't even here. And I think those kinds of things can translate even back to the winery, like you were addressing or referencing from our previous conversation about how, for me, one of the biggest things is just how wineries are often designed really facilitates that separation between vineyard worker, winery worker, and even sometimes the hospitality and therefore consumer. And so creating more opportunities, one of the big things for me as someone who's worked in the vineyard is not only creating more pathways out of the vineyard, but also very, very importantly, creating more respect and opportunity and joy and pay in the vineyard. At least felt working with all of my coworkers that I've never met a more happy group of people. I've never been happier myself in my life. I grew up working construction and found fulfillment working with my hands there. And that was part of how I ended up in the vineyards. But working in the vineyards is a profound experience in the sense of being under the great blue skies, or even sometimes the starry nights when we're doing night harvests, working with our hands, doing something, growing something. There's an incredible amount of value. And I think as we progress in the future to a place where, attention is the currency of the future, it gets said a lot, but I think in the wine industry, it's very true. And I think our viticulture, our knowledge in the vineyard is a great place, because I think the only real meaningful way to build that attention currency is to have authenticity. And you just have an abundance of authenticity in the vineyard that I think is an untapped resource. And like I said, it's, environmental justice is so linked to social justice. These answers come from our vineyard workers, from the communities that have been doing this work historically, and making sure that as we're having this opportunity to hopefully rebuild systems and in a way that is in alignment with our new knowledge about the future of our climate and our environment, that we're also taking this time to make sure that we're building it in a way that deals with the social issues that have never been dealt with, deals with the hard history of the Fair Labor Act and the agricultural exclusion from that, even had me working 10-hour days, 6 days a week without any benefit of overtime pay. Obviously, that is changing here in California, but federally, that law still stands. And, my biggest question always was, well, why do the farmers or the owners get to win on not employing us on the rainy days, but then also employing us when they need us without the pay or the benefit of overtime pay like every other profession gets in this country? So dealing with things like that, and listening to the voices that have been talking about this for so much longer than it seems like the global or national awareness has been.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you so much for sharing a lot of that in your Stewards of the Narrative. For those of you who haven't yet been able to check that out and read it, highly encourage you to do so. Reach out to Gabriela, talk to her about it. She's very, very impassioned about making sure that these changes are happening. And if you're also in a position of power, this is how we create change. As long as we're asking those questions, we're getting those conversations started, we can work towards bettering these conditions and make sure that as we look to create these systemic changes and make this a sustainable future, that we're including everybody, and certainly starting with the people who are taking care of the vineyards right from the start, which is our vineyard stewards.